Hi, I'm Dennis Murphy from Sustainable Silicon Valley. We've partnered with KMVT 15 to launch Exergy TV, a show that explores the Bay Area's energy and potential to change our environment. I'd like to thank producers Josh Young and Marisol Malara for their energy in transforming an idea into action. So what is Exergy? First answer is to look it up because it's a good read about the second law of thermodynamics. But really, in short, it's about the available energy and the useful work potential of energy. But secondarily, it's about the potential to cause change in an environment and an ecosystem health indicator. We thank you for watching. Now on with the show.
Hello, and welcome to Exergy TV, where we investigate topics surrounding sustainability in the Bay Area. I'm your host, Melissa Dinwiddie. On today's show, we will be discussing our water supply. What are the issues? What is being done? And what can we do to ensure a sustainable water supply? Joining me is the former and current mayor of Mountain View. She has served and is serving on various water resources boards and commissions, and has spent an entire career as a civil engineer specializing in water resources management. There is no better person to talk to about this issue. I am delighted to welcome Mayor Pat Showalter.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
Pat, it is such a delight to have you here. I know that the last 20 years of your career have been devoted to flood protection and environmental restoration. And before that, you graduated from Mount Holyoke College with majors in geology and American history, and you got a master's in civil engineering at UC Berkeley, which is my alma mater, by the way. And I'm really curious, what got you interested in water in the first place? And let's start there, and then also, what are some of the projects that you've worked on?
Okay. Well, going back to when I was in college, I was a geology major, and there's an awful lot of geology that you don't see. It's things that, happen at depth. They take millions of years, and I just really wasn't, I wasn't excited by that. And so I made this list of what are all the geological things I've liked, and they all had to do with water. So I said, okay, I'm going to take hydrology. So they didn't offer it at my college, so I took a semester at Princeton where they did have it, and I took hydrology, and I was hooked. I just thought it was fascinating, and so I planned to go to graduate school. And at that time, if you were going to work in hydrology, the most likely thing to do would be to get a master's in civil engineering and then specialize and take all the hydrology classes, and that's what I did.
Fabulous. And I know you had a little personal incident in Princeton as well, isn't that right?
Yeah, fortunately I met my husband, and it was a great semester. What
so
can
it all
I say?
worked out. So what changes do we anticipate for our water supply due to climate change? And how are we building resilience to prepare for the future?
That's a really good question. And, we really expect a lot more volatility in how our rain falls. So historically, we've had snow, a big snowpack in the Sierras that for California serves as a reservoir. And it snows during the winter, and then during the spring and summer, hopefully it slowly melts and comes down and feeds into reservoirs and streams. And that's really the big supply of water for most of California. But moving forward, we know that there is going to be much more rain falling in the mountains. And So although we expect the amount of water to be about the same, the form of that water is going to be different. And so some of that water is going to rush down in the middle of the winter in storms and cause more flooding than we've had. So that's going to mean, from a water supply point of view, we need to have more storage facilities for the surface water. We just need to be organized so that we can take care of that volatility. And actually in California, that we're maybe better suited to do that than most places, because when you think about it, we have a 6-month drought every year. You know, we have a Mediterranean climate, and what that means is it rains and snows from October through April, and then we have sunny weather the rest of the time, right? So we're sort of plumbed to deal with that, but there's going to be even more volatility in the system.
Well, speaking of volatility and being prepared, do we have enough water for all the new development that's being constructed and planned for, just for example in Mountain View, where you're mayor?
You know, I'm really glad you asked that question, because it's not it's not just an easy you don't multiply the number of people by the number of gallons of water, and that's how it works. We actually use almost just 2/3 of the water in Mountain View now that we used in 1980, when we had a lot fewer people. And if you want to really get into the nitty-gritty of it, you should go to the city's urban water management plan. And every city in California is required to put one of these together every 5 years, and it looks out like 20 years. And you basically have to say, well, at complete build out, do we have enough water? And if not, then you have to adjust your zoning or your water supply so that you do. Well, it turns out that in Mountain View, we do have plenty of water for full build out of our zoning plans for the next 20 years, as long as we're in normal years. If we're in drought years, like we had a couple years ago, we'll still need to conserve.
Okay, so what accounts for the change from the 70s and 80s to now, the use of water?
Yeah, it's really interesting. In the 70s and 80s, there was quite a bit of manufacturing in Mountain View, and it wasn't designed to conserve water. They used, water pretty much as they needed. So there isn't very much manufacturing anymore, and so that's cut it down. But another thing that's cut it down has just been all the changes in conservation that we have. For instance, we all have low flow toilets now, and the old toilets used about 5 gallons per flush, and the new ones use a little more than 1. So when you think that the average person flushes the toilet 10 times a day, that in itself is a lot of water. And there are other efficiencies too. We have low flow shower heads, and faucets don't run necessarily at the same speeds that they used to, and people are more aware. So those are things that have made it happen.
I'm so glad that you shared that, Pat, because it's really easy as an individual to think, well, what I do doesn't really have an impact. It's really not that big of a deal. But when you add it all together, to see the impact of everybody together making these small changes really does make a huge difference.
It really does. It's quite remarkable. One of the things that the way we use water in California, we use about half of our water, for a single family home anyway, you use about half of your water on irrigating your landscaping. So if you have landscaping that uses a lot of water, like a lawn, then that uses much more water than if you replace it with native plants or just drought tolerant plants. Or perhaps you'll just make the part of the lawn smaller. You might have all of your open space lawn, and you might decide, no, I'll make part of it flower beds, I'll make part of it trees, I'll I'll just reduce the part of the lawn to what I actually use for lawn, like, you know, your kids playing on or your dog. And that makes a big difference. And you can get rebates for that through the city and the Santa Clara Valley Water District.
Oh, I bet a lot of people weren't even aware about that.
Yeah, and you know, we advertise that really strongly during the drought. But the truth is, it's better to do when we're not in a drought, because when you put in those new plants, they need to be established. And usually the plants are happier, you know, if there's some water. So it's better if the first few years are actually wet, but you know, we don't get to control that and you can't know. So this is a good time. If you're thinking of redoing your landscaping, go for it. It's a great time.
Great suggestion. So let's talk for a moment about water quality. What are some steps that we need to take to ensure a high quality of water supply for our community?
Well, we have the water supply that we get from the Sierras is in a very pristine area. We get about 80% of our water from the Hetch Hetchy system, and that's in you know, that's part of Yosemite National Park. There's very little happening up there. You know, very little urban. There's no urban runoff into the reservoir, and then it's a closed pipe that comes all the way down here. So that means that our water supply from there is just really clean. And then another thing that is very, I think people don't realize, is how much water is tested. It's not like we rely on the fact that it comes from this pristine area and just take it for granted that by the time it gets here everything is okay. We do chlorinate it locally before it goes into our pipes, and then it's tested. It's tested at the source before it goes into the pipe, and then there are all sorts of places throughout the distribution system that it's tested. I mean, literally, Mountain View's drinking water is tested thousands of times a year. And there is a report that comes out annually, the water quality report that everybody gets a very short version of in their utility bill, but then they get the link for the long version if they want to go look at it. Comes out every year that shows how we're meeting the water quality standards. And of course those standards change, and what we measure for, you know, what we monitor for has to change, and we do that.
Excellent. Well, another thing that I wanted to bring up is how there's some really significant, very important issues about water, just specifically, again, due to climate change. And let's talk about what's at risk if we don't adapt.
What's at risk if we don't adapt? There's really, in Mountain View, there's two things I talk about a lot in terms of adapting. One is our water supply. You know, we talked about the volatility. And two is sea level rise protection. We are a shoreline city. We have the beautiful bay right on our boundary, and so sea level rise is, you know, literally right on our boundary. So those are two things that we have to be worrying about and working about for, you know, seriously. And let's talk about recycled water first. Most of the water that we use goes through our sewer pipes, and it goes to the treatment plant in Palo Alto, and that water, part of that water is discharged into the bay, and another part of it is discharged into our purple pipe system. In California, if you see a purple pipe, that means this purple, that's pretty good likeness, that means it's a recycled water pipe, and you're not supposed to drink it. But the water is very good for irrigation or flushing toilets. So really, since the 80s, we have had a distribution system in the North Bay Shore for irrigation purposes. And so that water goes, you know, into the North Bay Shore. It's used to water lawns, the golf course, that kind of thing. But there have been some problems with it over the course of time because it's frankly too salty. And that means that sensitive plants, like, turns out redwoods are sensitive, orange trees are sensitive. We don't have too many of those in the North Bay Shore. Grass can be sensitive if you water it too much. So Because the salt content is too high, we need to reduce that. And we have a great plan to do that. What we're doing is we're building a recycled water treatment plant in the corner of the Palo Alto treatment plant. And it's going to take the tertiary treated water that, you know, has been going on for 20, 30 years. It's going to take some of that and it's going to treat it even further. I think we're all familiar with desalination. We've heard about it for many, many years. They use it on the space station. They use it on submarines. But essentially what we do in this plant, this extra plant, is we're going to use some of those desalination techniques. But we're not going to use it on seawater. We're going to use it on the wastewater. And so instead of the total dissolved solids being about 800 or 900, they're going to come out after this process being about 5. And so we're going to mix that. We're going to mix that very, very pure, advanced purified water with our standard recycled water and ship it back into the North Bay Shore. And it's just going to be a much better product because, you know, at the levels it will be great for all of the uses that, you know, normal potable water would be. But it's not potable water, and we're not taking it out of, you know, directly out of the snowpack. It gives us local control, and it's drought proof because, you know, we're going to continue flushing our toilets whether there's a drought or not.
So this sounds like it's going to be expensive.
It is expensive, and fortunately, we have been able to cobble together a series of grants and bonds, and we're also contributing money from our water supply funds to construct this. So it is expensive, but over the long pull, it will pay off.
Well, we'll talk more about that in a moment. Up next, we'll find out more about what's being done and what you can do to help ensure a sustainable water supply. But first, let's hear from our sponsors.
Exergy TV is sponsored by Oren's Hummus. Oren's Hummus has 6 locations and a catering facility servicing the Bay Area from Los Gatos to San Francisco. Oren's prides themselves on authentic food by importing key ingredients to create the traditional flavors of the Mediterranean and Middle East. They combine this with hummus, dips, and sauces that are all made fresh daily from natural ingredients. They use Angus beef, all-natural chicken, and 100% organic eggs. There are never any preservatives or fillers, so you know everything you order is tasty and healthy. Check out their locations in Los Gatos, Cupertino, Mountain View, Palo Alto, or San Francisco to tantalize your taste buds. We would also like to thank Sustainable Silicon Valley. Sustainable Silicon Valley is a nonprofit think and do tank focused on water use and reuse, air quality, mobility, and equitable regenerative communities in a decarbonized Bay Area. You can learn more about Sustainable Silicon Valley and how you can get involved by visiting their website at sustainablesv.org.
So, Pat, earlier we were talking about recycled water, which is so fascinating to me. And I know that you've also done a lot of work around sea level rise.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about that and some of the work that's being done around sea level rise and how to mitigate that?
Yeah, and I just want to bring up that one of the reasons that you asked me to be on this show is because I went and spoke to your Leadership Mountain View class. And a big part of the message that I wanted to make is that actually a lot is being done. And I think I want to make sure and just state that right up front, because I think, you know, when you just read the headlines, things can seem pretty dire. And I don't mean to say that they're not serious. They are serious, but there is a tremendous amount of work being done and people should be aware of it. So that's what I want to say. I work kind of 2 layers on sea level rise protection. I serve on the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, which is kind of analogous to the Coastal Commission, but for San Francisco Bay. And so we're the only agency that has jurisdiction around the whole Bay Area, and we are really leading the charge on planning for sea level rise protection for the whole Bay Area. Because when you think about it, all of the projects that will have to be built around the Bay to protect us from sea level rise are all going to have to fit together in order for it to work for everybody. And we also want to be able to do it in a way that is really sensitive to environmental justice issues, which maybe haven't been given as much emphasis as they certainly should have in the past. So that's kind of like the big picture. And if people are interested, they should go to the BCD website and look under Bay Adapt. And there's a tremendous amount to learn there. But focusing in a bit more on Mountain View, what are we doing here? Well, in 2012, the City Council agreed to hire a consulting firm to do an assessment of what was the sea level rise risk here and how should we deal with it. And that was done, and they came back with a series of 14 projects that we need to do in order to protect ourselves from sea level rise. And they, and then a few years ago we updated it because the science about how much sea level rise there's going to be and how quickly it's going to happen has changed. So we updated it. So that was good. So we have this plan, and I'm really happy to say that we're implementing it. This is not a plan that is just sitting on the shelf in the Public Works Department of the City of Mountain View. Far from it. We are actively going through these projects, and I think from the big picture point of view, what people will see is that we're restoring the salt ponds that are adjacent to Shoreline Park to marshes. And marshes are kind of Mother Nature's natural sponge. They absorb a lot of water and they absorb a lot of wave action. And fortunately, they're also really, really great for habitat. So, so these old salt ponds that are part of the South Bay Salt Pond Project that are adjacent to us are going to be restored. And right now, what we're doing is we're building up the shoreline a little bit. We're raising so it's going to be, the levee's going to be a little higher. And the Shoreline Park is a landfill. So
Right.
essentially that's the toe of a landfill. So we have to protect that as well. That has to be fortified. So we're fortifying that, and we're essentially putting a lot of dirt into that salt pond to build what's called a horizontal levee, or it's just really a levee with a very, very gentle slope. So once we get that horizontal levee built and we get the toe of the landfill fortified, we're going to poke some holes in the berms that go all the way around that salt pond. Some of them will be on the Stevens Creek side, and some of them will be on the Permanente side. And then bay waters will come in and out on every tide cycle, and they'll bring in plants, and they'll bring in dirt to fill it up. And in about 5 years, we will have a beautiful marsh.
Amazing. I know that when you came and spoke with my class, my Leadership Mountain View class, I had no idea that all of this work was being done. And I was very impressed to learn that it was. What I would also love to hear you speak about is what's at risk if we don't adapt. And I know, there might be people who, for example, maybe they live in the hills and they're thinking, what do I care? It's not going to affect me if sea level rises, right?
There is a really serious study done last year that came out and essentially said that we're at risk of about $25 billion worth of damage if we don't invest approximately $10 million in sea level rise protection.
Wow.
And that's for the whole Bay Area.
10 million?
Billion. Billion with a B. So in other words, one of the things that's a daunting amount of money, right?
Yeah.
Right? But one of the things that's a little more palatable about it is sea level rise isn't going to all happen in 1 week or one or 1 year. It's a gradual thing. So there are projects that need to be done earlier than others, and that means that the work to protect us from sea level rise really needs to be done over the next 10, 15, 20 years. We don't need to pay for it all now. We don't need to do it all now. But we do need to plan for it and get ready for it and build the basis for it. And one of the first things on the list that need to be done are restoring the marshes. When you look around South Bay, the South Bay is kind of rung with salt ponds. They used to be Cargill salt ponds, and they were literally salt factories for about a century. And then 25 years ago, they were sold to a consortium of the state and the feds, which is called the South Bay Salt Pond Project. And 2 of those ponds are the ones that are adjacent to Mountain View. So there's this plan to restore the vast majority of these salt ponds to marshes. But it takes a while because there's lots of permitting issues. It's expensive. And then after you do it, you have to wait like 5 years for the marsh to develop. So you can't expect the marsh to be protective until it's had time to develop. So that's one of the earliest things we need to do, and that's why we're working on that first.
Absolutely. Well, let's switch a bit and let's look at what individuals can do. I know it's really easy to fall into sort of a feeling of hopelessness, a feeling of complacency, a feeling of, well, Pat Showalter, she's the mayor, she's a big muckety muck. What can I as an individual do except maybe get a low flow, shower head or something?
That's a good thing.
What else can individuals do to make a difference?
This may sound silly, but I really think at this point in time, the most important thing we can do is vote. Especially,
it's not silly at all.
It's not silly. In the national elections, we're in this fall, we're really facing one candidate who doesn't believe in climate change. When he was president, he rolled back all sorts of protections, and another candidate that that does and has put forward the largest infrastructure funding in our nation's history. So I really think that can't be emphasized enough. Of course, voting on the local level is really important too. But I have to say, on the local level, it's pretty easy because almost everybody that runs in the Bay Area is very, very environmentally conscious. So there are lots of lots of good choices on that level. But it sounds silly, but I think the voting is really important. And then the other thing is getting involved in grassroots organizations that protect things. They have a lot of knowledge and they advocate, and it just makes a tremendous difference to hear from organizations that are made up, of course, of voters and residents about various topics. One in Mountain View that I think is a particular example is Carbon Free Mountain View. They were instrumental in getting the Sustainability Task Force established 2 times ago. I think it was like about 2010, and then having another one in 2017. And so getting involved is a big deal.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor Showalter, for being here with us today, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in. I would also like to thank our crew and our sponsors for making this show possible. I'm Melissa Dinwiddie, and I will see you next time here on Exergy TV. Bye-bye.